Thank you all for joining, or if we have any of the Australian contingent in the evening as well. Thank you all for joining. This is our third day of the 50/50 Festival, and we're so pleased to be bringing you this session with our partners, ABC Australia. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lara Joannides, and I am the 50/50 Equality Project Lead at the BBC. So I look after all of the hundreds of teams who take part in the monitoring and have overseen our rollout of monitoring to include disability and ethnicity as well. So a little bit of housekeeping first of all. This is an interactive session, so please do make sure that you send in your questions to us using the Q&A option at the bottom of your screens. We also do have live closed captions, so if you need those, please make sure to turn them on. Again, that option will be at the bottom of your screens. And I'm going to be speaking to the ABC Australia team very shortly. We're really pleased to have them. In the meantime, you can also share on social media that you're with us today with the hashtag 50/50 project. So before I speak to the team, we're going to run a brilliant video from ABC News Australia, which just gives us a taste of some of the people and the areas of content that have been taking part in the 50/50 project down there.
PACB decided to get on board this 50/50 project because 50% of the population in the Pacific are women, and it's important that their stories get told. This has become a daily conversation in our editorial meetings. It pushes us to reach out to women talents in all those places of decision making and power and also business. So it's a daily conversation that we have, and it's been very successful so far.
This is Pacific Beat on ABC Radio Australia.
The 50/50 strategy was a no-brainer for the news channel because if we could better represent the audiences that we're broadcasting to, then they'd notice. Well, in 2020, we achieved our biggest broadcasting audience ever. And for every single month of the year, we had 50% or more females on the channel. But it wasn't easy.
No, and that's because the organisations that we interview are male dominated and women just weren't in the roles of spokespeople. So we had to work really hard to get our contact books full of women and also talk to these organisations about why women weren't being put forward to speak with the media.
So the big story for us here in Victoria in 2020 was obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly those 111 days that Melburnians spent in lockdown. What's really great about this newsroom is that the journalists really kept their focus on those 50/50 goals. So every day they were having those conversations about how do we get more women into our stories as case studies, as expert voices. And in their daily commissioning, everyone was thinking about how do we tell the stories that are really relevant to women, and how do we tell those stories about the distinct ways in which women experienced this pandemic.
We had two main aims when we signed on to the 50/50 project. We wanted to increase our coverage and representation of women in sport and also grow our overall female audience for our sports stories. And by appointing a reporter who was really dedicated to that 50/50 work and through some experimentation and trial and error, we were able to make some really huge gains in that area. And our whole sport teams really benefited from the sharing of ideas and information and contacts that we've generated through that process.
Yeah, it really was. Kirsten, the Aussies falling just short.
Love that video from all the ABC News teams who've been working so hard to increase the representation of women as part of 50/50. So yeah, ABC have been taking part in 50/50 equality since 2018. They're one of our earliest external partners to sign up. And so I'm very pleased to have with us today Emma Pearce, who is a 50/50 equality co-lead for ABC News. Hi, Emma. Thanks for joining. And Gavin Fang, who is ABC News's head of network and news gathering and also their diversity lead for news. Hi, Gavin. So we're here today to talk about how 50/50 is branching out into looking at wider diversity monitoring. But before that, could you give me an idea of how your tracking for gender has been going on at Emma, going on ABC Emma, you know, how you've been able to make it a success, and also you have so many teams doing it. How many teams do you have doing it now?
We now have almost 50 teams, Lara, which is almost the entirety of the news and current affairs division. So we're really excited to have that many. We just signed up 2 new teams as part of Challenge Month as well, so that was great. But when we started in 2019, we just started with 2, maybe 3 teams, I think it was. We just ran a pilot for a month and saw we were sort of tracking at about 42% representation. So a bit of room for growth there. Really excitingly, we did quite a bit of a push at the end of last year. We really wanted to see what we could draw out of the teams after such a year. We thought, well, let's throw one more thing on top, but we achieved 50% in December, which was really exciting. And of course, we're really looking forward to sharing our results from March with everybody. Stay tuned for that over the next couple of days.
Yeah, we're really excited to share that. It's been so brilliant having the partners all take part in the challenge, and thank you for all your hard work on making it a success for ABC. So what have been the biggest challenges that you faced in increasing women's representation?
I think one of the first and biggest challenges has just been asking people who are working really hard and really stretched to do one more thing. But what's really helped us there is the fact that everybody really understands why we're doing this and what the end goals are and why we want to achieve better gender balance in our content. So that has helped us. And the feedback from the teams too has been that because this system is so simple and the workflow is easily adaptable, I think because it's been formulated peer-to-peer. So journalists working with journalists, we understand the pressures, we can talk to them about where it's hard and try and find ways to help them. Like the public broadcaster like us, like the BBC, of course, we want to be really representative of our audience, and that is a big part of this as well. It fits really closely in line with our broader news strategy. So all of that means teams can then embrace the work and do it, and that helps us overcome some of those challenges. I think too last year, I don't know, is it too soon to joke about the global pandemic? It probably is for a lot of people on this call today. But it was one more thing on top of so much. You know, we're all dealing with the pandemic all day at work, in our personal lives, every aspect. And then when we started to look at policymakers and decision makers and people that were dealing with the response globally too, it was skewing really heavily male. So that became a huge challenge for teams last year. But then what we saw was this amazing movement as everybody rose to the challenge, and they really started to look for, well, where are the opportunities where we can raise female voices and experiences of what's going on? You know, we looked at the front line, we looked at aged care workers, childcare workers, teachers, and we found more diverse and more females to talk to about how they were experiencing the pandemic in their lives. And it resulted in richer stories for us because we really broadened out the sorts of people whose stories we were trying to tell as we lived through that. So it was a big challenge, but we got there in the end.
Yeah, amazing. I think a lot of our teams at the BBC will be feeling exactly the same way about all the work that's been happening over the last 13, 14 months now. So question to both of you, aside from the actual figures and the new stories that we're getting out there as a result, what have been the other gains for ABC? Have you had any feedback from audiences, for example?
I think I'll go. Oh, do you want to go first, Kat?
No, you go, Em. Yeah, you go.
Yeah. I actually have spent a bit of time over the last couple of days going through pulling together notes for our report for you, Lara, for March. And so there's been quite a bit of feedback there from the teams and some of the notes they've sent through. And it's been really interesting to see some of the themes that are coming through as well. I think there's been quite a few gains for us. I think the first one is that we're telling better stories because we're actually telling stories that are richer with a lot more voices and perspectives in them. Teams are saying that the tracking is influencing the story development process for us from all the way from the story selection to who we're including in those stories, all the way through to where are we going to publish and where are we going to broadcast the stories. Teams are also saying their contact books are starting to really boom. We're just getting so many new voices in, which is great. And those voices are more diverse. So even going beyond just looking at gender. And that, of course, makes all this work easier because we have the people there on the books and they're easy to go to. And we are starting to get really excitingly some feedback through from the audience. So sometimes that's coming from the people that we're speaking to, the contributors and the talent in the stories. Sometimes it's coming in through social media and places like that. But it's really exciting to hear teams starting to report back and saying, oh, we're getting this positive feedback. People are noticing the difference. But really excitingly, a few teams are starting to say to us now, we're noticing that as we're going to other organizations and asking them for spokespeople, it's getting so much easier to get women and diverse contact suggestions from them because we've been asking them. And now they're saying, oh, we do have a woman who's media trained who can speak to you about that story. So we're actually seeing change in organisations outside of the ABC, which is quite exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just to pick up on what Em said about better stories, I think that's been one of the big changes that have come out of 50/50, and it's really driven a lot of cultural change, I think, in our organisation around how we're thinking about the audience. Are the stories relevant? Who are we speaking to for these stories? And it's really laid the groundwork for us about what we're going to do next, or what we are doing now around broader diversity.
Brilliant. And yeah, that's exactly what I was going to lead on to. So how, with all that culture change, how have you started to move out of monitoring gender into monitoring ethnicity and other diversity as well?
Yeah, so it's always been our intent to go to add on from the work that we've done around gender in the 50/50 project to then look at broader diversity. And the ABC has a number of kind of workforce goals as well around diversity in our organisation. But we also have a charter obligation to reflect the country, to look and sound like Australia. So we really want to do that. But also, coming back to that better story idea, we've got a news strategy which is about being more relevant to more Australians. So, to do that, you need to hear more perspectives from people. You need to broaden out who you're talking to. And the 50/50 work has allowed us to start that journey. So now we're embarking on what we're calling the Equality Project, and that's really the extension of the 50/50 work. And that's looking at Indigenous Australians, culturally diverse Australians, people with disability, and looking at ways that we can expand on telling stories that include or are more inclusive of a broader cross-section of Australia. And again, to tell better stories by hearing their views and by broadening out the people that we're talking to. And so we're now starting down the track of doing the same things that we've done for 50/50, which is tracking, talking to our staff about the best way to do this, finding ways to drive the editorial conversation around broader diversity and better storytelling that involves a broader cross-section of the country.
Fantastic. And I've been working quite closely with Emma on how you've been doing that. And I think a lot of people on this call will probably really want to hear, the practicalities of what it takes. So can you give me a bit of an idea of what some of the key challenges were in kind of coming up with your strategy for how to do this and how it differs from the gender monitoring, Emma?
It's obviously far more complex and sensitive space, Lara. So one of the first things was just for us to grapple with and work through, and your team was so supportive in answering some of these questions and talking to about it, is around that idea of, identification and what a personal thing it is. For a lot of these diversity verticals that we're looking at. But where we've really settled and where the 50/50 project and the extension of that has helped us is that we're really thinking about, well, what we're monitoring here is the perceived diversity in our content, and ensuring that then is just a tool that sparks an actual editorial conversation. So that has helped us with that. Some of the other practical things that we've had to deal with, I've spent a lot of time talking to lawyers about the privacy considerations here, because it is personal and sensitive information that we're talking about. There was a lot to work through with that. And that's led to, though, great innovation. Things like we've been, over the last couple of months, developing a new tool to help our teams track who are they using in their stories in a way that completely anonymizes the data. And so we're really just, as an end result, looking at percentages and trend lines, and we can see where we're having some movement there, which is good, but it takes it away from that real sort of personal element. Some of the other practical things that have been really helpful as well is that we've talked to our staff about it a lot internally. We've consulted with diverse staff about their experiences and their perspectives on it. But we've also consulted with external organisations as well, who've given us guidance, and we've spent quite a lot of time working through, what are the questions we want to ask? How do we want to have these conversations? And I would encourage any organisation that's thinking about it to really have those conversations. Sometimes it can be difficult at first because it can feel a little bit awkward to be having the conversation, but the more you work through it and really workshop, well, what are the difficulties here? I think what we always keep coming back to is what we want to do is tell better stories and better represent our population. And this is just a tool that gets us to that end game. And it's been great to be able to say, well, look at the results we got with gender, because that gives us the confidence to talk about it. And the more confident we are as we talk about it, the more confident people are to take the tool and run with it.
For sure. Oh, sorry, Gavin, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's, you know, what Em's saying about the conversations. I think one of the things that struck me about as we move on to doing more work in the diversity space, in addition to gender, is that actually internally, people are quite concerned about getting this wrong. Our staff are concerned about, hey, if we get this wrong, are we offending somebody? Are we doing the wrong thing? They really want to get it right. And I think, you know, that's been a positive out of having a lot of conversations with them. We did a pilot, like Emma launched a pilot about how we could do tracking and to talk to our staff about that. And I think that's really will help them build confidence about, yes, we can do this in a way that's not getting it wrong.
Yeah, so I was actually going to ask, it's really interesting to hear what the kind of reaction has been from the staff. I mean, you know, I've been talking to all the BBC teams here, and it's getting, you know, quite different concerns from each department and division. So, you know, aside from being afraid of potentially getting it wrong, but it's brilliant because that opens up a conversation. What are some of the other difficulties or particular maybe barriers to really getting this monitoring rolled out that you've come up with or that people have raised?
Look, I think there are some practical issues around, you know, busy reporting teams and adding another layer of tracking onto that and being able to explain why we're asking people to do that, and coming back to that audience perception that Em spoke about and thinking about the audience. Having an effective tracking system that actually works for that is another challenge. You know, Em also mentioned getting over those privacy concerns. There are significant legal issues in Australia around that and how we can collect and store data. I think coming back to that culture, the idea that maybe this is tokenistic, and I think, you know, to be successful at something like this, and again, coming back to 50-50, that's why this has been such a great process to go through to build a base for this. We've had to convince our staff over that period that it's actually about doing better journalism. And I think any of these programs to be successful for journos, for cynics like us, you have to take it back to, and this is what we've continually done, why are we doing this? Because it helps us tell better stories. And I think that's been the real change in the way that our staff have responded from when we started with gender to where we are now. You know, 2 years ago, even doing gender, people thought, is this just tokenistic? We don't get any of that, or not much of that anymore. And I think that's been a really big challenge, but one that, you know, we're progressively overcoming.
I think too, there's a real, when we talk to teams about it, they really agree that they want to see this sort of change affected. And what they really like about the tracking system is that it is actually a practical thing that they can apply. So although it adds a few extra steps, it's not a lot of work, and it's a small thing. And then they see the gains over time because you're talking about trends and you can see movement and change, and that's self-motivating in itself as well.
So yeah, just to remind everyone, please do pop your questions in the Q&A. We really want to hear from you, and it'll be great to kind of get your thoughts. And if you have any specific things that you want to hear from Emma or Gavin or myself about how to possibly do this in your organisation, please do ask. So we actually do have a question from an anonymous attendee. How do you monitor when you don't necessarily know what someone's ethnicity is? So what kind of processes do you have in place for the monitoring to happen with your teams at the moment?
So we can talk about the results of the pilot we did last year. We haven't rolled out the full tracking module across the ABC yet, because we're still tweaking that and developing the new tool. One of the things we say is that if you don't know, don't count. And in that case, just move forward. We know it's not about the data. It's not a sophisticated measure. It's really just about having something to look at that will then spark that editorial conversation. And we also advise teams to you can look at things based on a perception. It is a perception test. So think about what the audience might see or hear, but don't make any sort of assumptions based on one characteristic alone, for example. So there's a lot of different factors that come into play when we're talking about the talent that we're involving in stories. Most of the time we've had a conversation with them. It might be quite relevant to the story that you're telling. You might have picked up some cues based on a combination of appearance or how they sound or references to, their culture or where they were born and that sort of thing. So if you've got enough of those factors at play, then you can make an educated assumption there, but also, of course, looking at what's available publicly in terms of information and things like that too. But we always say, if you're just not sure, then just don't count and move on, and that's absolutely fine. We know we're not going to capture everything, particularly when we start looking at people with disability. There's a huge range of people who identify as living with disability, but those disabilities are not, physically apparent. And so, think about all the sensory and mental health concerns and things like that. So we know we're not going to capture that in this test, and that's absolutely fine. We just look at how we're tracking over time, and that will set a benchmark, and then we'll be able to see where we need to go to improve.
Great, that's really good to hear. It's quite kind of similar to what we're doing at the BBC as well. It would be really interesting actually to just in terms of logistics, for you to explain how you set up the pilot, how kind of big or small the pilot was, what kind of teams you got involved in the beginning, and what would be some of your tips for organisations who want to start their own pilots?
Sure. So we started by selecting teams that were doing quite well with the gender work. So we knew that they were really familiar with the process. They knew what best practice was. And we thought what we'll say to them is we want to add a couple of steps here. We also thought about things like, because we publish to so many different platforms, we're online, we're broadcasting for television, we're broadcasting for radio. We thought, let's capture teams that are filing to all of those platforms so that we can get a sense of, is it going to be harder, for example, for audio first filing compared to the sorts of information that you find out about a person when you interview them for a digital story or a television story. And then we had a really close look at the guidelines that we wanted to give them for this work, because we knew there'd be a lot of those questions about, well, how do I talk about what I'm doing and how do I make those assessments? So we spent quite a bit of time going through editorial guidance notes. As I mentioned, we spoke to a lot of staff, and there's a lot of staff at the ABC that actually offer guidance specifically around reporting on diversity or in certain areas and things like that. We got some external advice. We got a huge amount of help from the BBC team and pulled together sort of a guidance note around it. And we had the teams working out of spreadsheets initially, and then took further advice on privacy and had to actually change things like making sure that there was passwords on those spreadsheets, that the data was corrected. We had to try different things like, there are daily programs. Do we look at all their data daily, or do we only look at their data weekly to help anonymize it? I'm really getting quite down into the weeds here, Lara. I don't know how much.
I think it's going to be I think it's going to be so useful for everyone listening.
I'd just add, look, we love all of our teams, as we all do everywhere, but we love some teams better than others. And I think the thing about something like this is you need to choose a team with a great leader or manager who's engaged in the project. So they're going to give you honest feedback with their staff about that, see how it works. Because if you take a pilot to a team that's kind of not quite there, you're not going to get the same level of feedback. So we took it to a where we knew that had enough content and was representative enough of the broader work that we do, but has a really good practical leader and a team that can actually safely have a conversation about, is this working, and feed that back to us honestly.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Oh, sorry, Emma, carry on.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to add that one thing, because of the disruptions that we were facing last year at the same time as trying to do the pilot, there were and the difficulties we had with things like navigating, I don't know if you have the same problem, but giving journalists spreadsheets to work in is not ideal. We had some problems there with the actual data collection. And so what we started to do was we checked in with them more regularly. So at least weekly, we were talking to every team, and that really helped us build some context around why we were getting the results we were getting and what were the things that we needed to change as we move forward to the next step.
Yeah, I think that's definitely been something that has been one of the bigger challenges for our teams as well, especially with everyone working from home so much more now. I think you're all back in the office now, or most of you are back in the office, but for our teams, getting them set up on the system so that it's in the secure system. We can't have cloud servers with this information. So yeah, for all the organizations listening, definitely something to be aware of, that the kind of logistical side of things is just as big in terms of how you collect the data. So moving on, I have a question which links to that quite nicely. Will all your teams likely move towards tracking ethnicity, or is it kind of optional or focusing on more appropriate teams than others at the moment? So of course, you selected, you know, the best placed teams to do the pilot. How are you planning on rolling it out?
My preference would be that all of our teams would eventually be tracking for diversity. We will probably roll it out in a staged approach with teams that we think we can work with initially, but ultimately we would like all of our teams to be tracking. I think, and Em can probably add to this, I think what we'll do is allow them to come up with a target or a baseline and then to work to improve on that, given how they over a period of time. But for us, you know, we think that every team should be having this conversation and should be, you know, changing their commissioning through it.
Great. And then we have another question. So what's been the biggest success and also the biggest challenges? So I think we've covered some of the challenges, but from kind of the small pilot that you've done so far, what have been kind of the most encouraging signs that you've seen?
Oh, you go.
Just that we are seeing a huge amount of enthusiasm for teams for this work at the moment. And I realize there is quite a momentum happening globally across media organizations, particularly where we've been looking to really look at how do we do better in this space, be more representative of the people that we want to serve with our content and have greater diversity in our content. And I think that has helped us a lot. The timing is really good for this work for us in that, and teams are really enthusiastic about it. So even before we've started the tracking work, just the work we've done so far with gender is already prompting all these conversations, and we're seeing more stories and greater diversity within that content already. And so I think in some ways, although tracking these broader diversity verticals is more complex than gender, it's actually, we've almost got a head start. It's almost an easier start than we had with gender in a way.
Yeah, I think that you know, that's exactly what we've been seeing. And actually, we're even having teams, I'm not sure if you're getting this, we're having people asking us about, well, what about even taking it further? What about sexual orientation, age, religion, all of those? For various reasons, we're not going to start doing those yet, but it's great to see that it's actually making the teams think about diversity as a whole and intersectionality in a much more considered way as well, which is fantastic. So we have a couple of questions that I want to see if they'd like to answer them, ask yourself. So Claire McGinn, don't know if you want to speak up and ask your question live?
Yeah, I'd love to. First of all, it's actually been brilliant to hear you guys talk with such conviction about what you're doing, and it does raise questions as well about what does it mean to be an Australian and who tells those stories. I just to ask this from a BBC perspective, because you're a public service broadcaster, have you been publicly attacked on social media or on other platforms from people for doing this, and what impact has it had on your staff?
Yes. So we have a love affair with the Murdoch papers in Australia, or they have a love affair with us. Anything that we do, they put on the front page, and it sells newspapers or gets clicks. So yeah, we have had over the journey a number of critical articles about what we're doing and accusations that we're either, you know, some kind of left-wing conspiracy or trying to, I don't know, have some kind of campaign that shifts what the news actually is. I think that initially there was some hesitation from probably managers more than staff around what the impact of this would be, and whether or not, you know, we wanted to be secretive about what we were doing. But I think the success of what we've done and the stories and that it's so visible that it has helped us do better stories has actually helped us overcome that. And so now there's much less reticence about this as an issue. And I actually like it when the papers now publish something about what we're doing, because I think it gives us more strength and actually helps us with the audience to know that, oh, actually the ABC is doing this, and maybe they're doing things that are more relevant to us as an audience.
Brilliant.
There was actually an article just before Christmas last year, Claire, and it was written in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek way, but it felt a little bit confronting to read it as the person that had been written about. But that prompted people from other organisations to reach out and say, hey, I read about this work that you're doing. I've got some contacts. I'd love you to add them to your contact book and involve them. And I just thought, oh, that old adage, no publicity is bad publicity. It holds true. So I would say there's been more positive reaction from the people we really want to serve.
That's great to hear.
Fantastic question. Thank you so much, Claire. And Anthony Rubin has also asked a question which is slightly connected to that, follows on from that quite well, actually. Anthony, did you want to ask your question live?
Yeah, so if I understand it rightly, you're monitoring based not on asking anybody about their ethnicity or disabilities, but based on your perception of it. And I wondered if you were concerned that a contributor was going to find out about how you categorize them and disagree.
Yes, Anthony, it is a big concern, and it's something we've grappled with a lot and talked about a lot and workshopped a lot. And I think Lara's teams have done this as well, really thought about where's the opportunity to ask people how they identify. Identification is such a very personal decision and feeling, and it changes all the time as well. What we realize we're doing, though, I think what we keep coming back to is that what we're monitoring is not actual diversity amongst the people that we're interviewing and working with. Sometimes we do know, and sometimes we're not sure. But what we're measuring here is what the audience is perceiving, because it's very much about what the audience's experience is. And we're not doing this in a way to try and meet targets and fit quotas. We're just measuring the data in a way that is anonymized, so it can't actually be linked to those people. So it gives us a sense of how our coverage is looking, and then prompts us to have a conversation that goes down the line of, well, did we consider the right mix of voices when we were talking about that issue and covering that story? Are there people we didn't hear from that we should have included? And how do we find those people and those voices?
Yeah, I think that's very, very well put, Emma. And thank you, Anthony. That's a really, really good question. It's very similar for us at the BBC as well. So we do have some teams who are actually collecting actual data at the BBC. They are asking their contributors to complete diversity forms and collecting that data. But that is not really possible for a large number of our teams, if you imagine particularly news teams, because they don't actually have direct access to a lot of the contributors they're featuring. You know, they're using shots and clips from agency, for example, or archive material, and they aren't actually having conversations directly with these contributors. So it's kind of a middle ground. We're trying to kind of do the best to get as much of an accurate view of what is going out in our content as possible, within the kind of constraints of production resources and actually the information that we do have access to. And I think Emma's point there is really, really important, which you also said earlier, Emma, is, you know, this isn't even though we're collecting the statistics to help us know where we are so that we know where we need to get to, it's not a kind of scientific statistical exercise where we're saying this is 100% the completely accurate reflection of everyone that's appearing in our content. But it's more a case of having as close an idea as possible of where we are so that we can use it to inform our decisions and change the way we're thinking. And I think, as Emma said so well as well, it is having that impact almost immediately in terms of changing the way teams are thinking, encouraging them to kind of broaden their work in terms of who they're reaching out to, what stories they're including. So it's kind of a mixed bag of statistical and culture work, really, and the two definitely go hand in hand. And again, this is actually going to follow on to another question we've had about how the gathering of the data differs from the UK and Australia. So how different it is to scope gathering ethnicity, you know, in terms of legal and data protection terms for us, and I think for Emma and Gavin in Australia as well, it has to be anonymized. So when we are doing the recording, it is essentially just numbers being added into a spreadsheet that will give you an overview. So we're not, unless it's the teams for us who are collecting actual data, you're not actually having a person's name next to how they've been monitored or counted. So it's all kind of aggregated. But yeah, with do you have any kind of any more of an idea, because I know I gave you kind of our background and our guide on how we're doing it, Emma, but how different is it for Australian teams, and what are the differences for you guys in terms of how you've had to set up the monitoring and scoping out ethnicity?
Within the privacy and legal constraints particularly, I think actually as we've worked through it, and we are still having conversations with the privacy lawyers about it and nutting it out, it's been very similar, Lara. So the anonymization of the data has been key, making sure that the data isn't linked to, say, if in the instance of a daily program, for example, if you looked at the data for just that one program and it had, say, 5 stories on it, you might perhaps be able to work out which data was affiliated with which package and therefore which person. So we've looked at things like, for some teams, maybe they only look at their data weekly or monthly if it's a weekly program, so that they really are just looking at trends. And one of the big things that we've done that we're nearly ready to pilot soon is develop this new tool where rather than a spreadsheet where the data is stored, because it's the storage of the data that is the biggest problem with the Australian privacy laws, the data is instead going into an app that then just gives you a percentage number. So you just get a percentage trend line or bar graph. We're still working through the graphics, essentially a representation. So the team can see how they're moving, but there's not really any way of figuring out how that data is connected to any particular person. So it's been the security of the data and the anonymization of the data that I think has been the key. And in the instance where if we were to ask, of course, then we'd have to ask permission to store the data, and then it becomes a whole completely different set of parameters and things that we would have to go through.
Yeah.
But we do want to help our teams and make it easier for people that we do have permission to have their information and to store that by building out a better contact database that over time allows, working journos to be able to access that in a faster way.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that has really helped our teams at the BBC is the launch of our new Voices database, which I think we made public to we made available to all of our teams on the 1st of March. And I think for any organisations who are interested in doing this and keen to do this, I think for your 50-50 leads, whoever's kind of helping implement this, giving as much support to staff and teams doing the monitoring as possible in order to help them improve their representation can make all the difference. So having something like a database which ticks all the data protection boxes and is all completely compliant, but that isn't a concern of the teams, they just access it and search who they need to is really, really important. So definitely something I think all of us here would advise other organisations to look at doing. Sorry, Gavin, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I totally agree. I mean, people, one of the excuses that we often get about, what talent did you get is, well, I was so busy, I just went and got that person. So we need to help to fix that as well through something like a talent database or the new Voices databases you've got.
And so now we've talked a lot about kind of the logistics and the workflow and the practicalities of doing this monitoring, looking ahead to how we hope to all replicate the success of the gender monitoring with ethnicity monitoring. Do you already have some kind of strategies and plans in place for trying to reach out to more people from different ethnic communities? And I know in the UK we say ethnic minority and Black, Asian and minority ethnic, but in Australia you say CALD, culturally and linguistically diverse. So do you have kind of plans for how to try and improve that pipeline of brilliant people?
Absolutely. So, one of the key parts of our new strategy about being more relevant is actually around community engagement and reaching out to different communities to speak to them and hear from them about what issues are. And so we have been doing a number of different community engagement events and things that we've kind of loosely termed embeds as well, where we send journalists out to outer suburban areas of most of our big cities, because we know that that's where it over-indexes for more diverse Australians. So by going and focusing on the outer suburbs, not necessarily focusing on diverse people, but focusing on the outer suburbs, we know that in our stories, we're going to hear from more different diverse communities. And that's a really big part of our strategy. We're starting, and we have set goals around number of engagement events talking to communities and going out and then using those as ways to tap into what are stories out there, but also just connect with people, build more contacts, hear about what's relevant, and then go back and tell more stories about those places. And that's helping with both the diversity work we're doing, but also with this broader news strategy about, what is the most relevant stories? How can we as a public broadcaster be as relevant to as many people as we can and not be contained to an inner urban style of storytelling or story?
That's fantastic work. And I think it's so exciting for us to hear how much you've already thought about it and how much you put into it, because definitely something that we can all learn from. So we'll start to wrap up shortly, but I have two more questions for you. One is, have your online teams also been monitoring the perception of ethnicity, and how have they had to do it differently compared to broadcast teams?
It's actually been much harder for our some of our online teams, because sometimes, say with the homepage team, for example, they're just looking at photos and headlines, and that's all the information they have. So we're thinking about whether there's a way to tweak the system to make it a little bit different for them, or maybe it might be that there are certain parts in the production chain where it's not appropriate to monitor for this sort of thing. But we have had a multi-platform team involved as part of the pilot. And so they were looking at online and broadcast, so both TV and radio. But I think what's different there is because they're making the content themselves, they're closer to the content and closer to the talent. So they have a lot more information about who's been interviewed and who's been included and who they approached but couldn't speak and that sort of thing as well. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. And I didn't know whether you wanted me to go into social there as well, but some teams are monitoring social content when we're producing it for social platforms first.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And one of the key things you kind of referred to there, which is what we always do with 50/50 at the BBC, is to really make sure that we kind of mold it and fit the methodology to suit that particular team or that particular outlet. We've always said with 50/50, it's not one size fits all in any way. We've kept our methodology as simple as possible so that it really can be tailored. So, there will be online teams or social teams who are curating their own content, and it's much easier for them to monitor. But even for broadcast content where, the teams don't have that direct editorial control over what they're putting out. So there are different ways of doing it. And, happy to advise, I'm not sure who asked that question, but, whether you're a BBC staff member or an external partner, we're happy to advise and work with you on how to tailor those methods to make it suitable for the different teams. Thank you so much. That's great. So I think this is a lovely question to wrap up the session for both you and Emma and Gavin. What has been the highlight of being part of 50/50 for you?
Well, opportunities like this to work with teams like yours, Lara, and other organisations in Australia, the opportunity to work with people at the ABC as well who are really so enthusiastic and passionate about this work. It's been a real labour of love. But I think to see the change that's actually happening, as I said before, both within our own organisation and everywhere else as well, and to be part of that has been on a level of personal satisfaction, a really big win for me.
I would say people competing to do better and then coming and telling me what they've done and how amazing their story is, and sending me emails saying, look, I've done this. And I think that just goes to the kind of that if you can tap into the passion around it, and you can find a way to actually, grab hold of journos and their desire to actually do better yarns and to get those stories out more broadly, then this stuff can be really successful. And for mine, seeing people, passionate about what would have been a strategy goal has been the best thing.
Thank you so much, both. I love hearing that. It's really fantastic. And I think, as we've been saying throughout this whole session, it's all about the stories. It's all about making sure that we are telling the best stories and serving our audience. But actually, doing this work, and exactly what you've just said, Emma and Gavin, is seeing how it makes the teams who are doing it feel so much more positive about their work, and really energizes a lot of people in the organizations. And I think that's equally important as well, because we all want to be happy where we are and happy where we work and feel like we're making a difference. I think that's why most of us, touch wood, got into journalism, so it's great to have something that gives us that opportunity. So thank you so much. It's been so brilliant speaking to you, and I think so much valuable advice and insight for a lot of the people listening. Don't forget, everyone who's tuned in, that this is day 3 of the 50/50 Festival. So we do have another event this afternoon, and then our big report launch tomorrow morning. So don't forget to sign up for that if you haven't already, and we're looking forward to seeing you there if you are joining. We're also going to be putting up the recordings for all of these sessions on our website, so keep an eye out for those links. And yeah, thank you so much all. It was great speaking to you, Emma and Gavin, and so lovely to have everyone who's joined and given us their questions. We really appreciate it.